Afternoon to all. I am absolutely delighted that this meeting in Frankfurt is taking place 1 year after the very important event that took place in Essen on 10th to 12th of November 2017, and that already was a meeting of the Food Policy Councils, the Ernährungsräte of Germany and other German-speaking countries. I'm delighted that, again, Anna Wiesmann is taking the lead in this process, and I would like to salute the important work done in Cologne by Anna Wiesmann, in Berlin by Christine Paul, in Freiburg by Peter Wolz and others, and of course the emergence of food policy councils in Frankfurt, in Oldenburg, in Dresden, and in other places. It's fascinating to see how this movement that started some 30 years ago in the US, in Canada, has percolated into England, is now reaching the European continent. Let me use the few minutes I have to deliver this message to perhaps try to recommend that we try to overcome three false dichotomies in our discussions on the future of food policy councils and of the role they can play in challenging the dominant food system. A first dilemma or dichotomy which I would like to challenge is between the so-called invented spaces and the invited spaces. And this is a distinction, a very useful distinction, introduced by our colleague from the University of Münster, Norbert Kersting, to distinguish the situations where the government or the municipality creates a space to consult civil society and other actors, and circumstances where civil society self-constitutes itself, establishing its own forum, roundtables, council, in order to organize itself to send a message to the government or to the municipality. And that is indeed a useful distinction if we try to highlight by this distinction that food policy councils can emerge as a result of an initiative coming from the authorities or as a result of an essay in self-constitution by civil society. But at the same time, we have to recognize that the formulas that work best are actually mixed formulas in which we have, of course, a large room for civil society to self-determine, to organize itself in the way it sees fit, depending on the local actors, the local resources, the local need for change and appetite for change. And at the same time, where connections are established with the governing authorities, the public authorities, the municipality, with respect to the municipal level in particular. Indeed, it is only the government, it is only the public authorities that can address the obstacles that those trying to change the food system encounter. Regulatory obstacles, for example, having to do with food safety regulations or with land planning ordinances, or obstacles that have to do with the economic viability of the particular initiative that is promoted by those trying to change the system. Sometimes the help, even the financial support of the authorities is required during the first few years at least for an initiative to be viable. And finally, it is the public authorities who have a very important lever for transformation, and that is the use of public procurement schemes by school meal programs, by having the public administration, public hospitals, and so on, use the market power they have as buyers of food in order to support local food producers that produce food sustainably. So for all these reasons, public authorities have tools that are essential for us in our attempt to make reforms, so that even where the space is self-constituted, even where the space is invented rather than invited by the authorities, it is important that these links be established, and if they are weak, that they be strengthened. A second dichotomy I would like to challenge is between representative democracy that goes through elections and the delegation of powers to certain elected representatives of the population on the one hand, and participatory democracy on the other hand, in which people participate in democratic life directly by various mechanisms such as consultations, referenda, or indeed food policy councils in which they try to propose alternatives to the dominant food system. I would like not to oppose those two modes of exercising democratic politics, and instead to show how they may be brought together in hybrid forms of democracy. The key challenge we have really is to ensure that we recapture ownership of the food systems. In other terms, that we challenge the current disproportionate influence exercised on policymaking in agriculture and food by the major economic actors of agri-food systems, particularly large food manufacturing companies and large food retailers. They have an economically dominant position, and very often these major actors translate this economic dominance into disproportionate political influence by being able to lobby and influence the decisions made by the elected politicians. So that is what we have to challenge. Now, to challenge that, it is not enough to build alternative formats where democracy can be exercised and practiced. It's important also to reform how decisions are made in the mainstream food system and to challenge this disproportionate influence of the dominant actors. That is the key objective, and we need to avoid, of course, the risk of citizens-led initiatives that transform the food system being co-opted into the dominant system, to be domesticated, if you wish, and even instrumentalized. But at the same time, we should avoid the risk of those initiatives remaining outside the mainstream, marginalized as niche innovations without any transformational power on the mainstream food system. So this is why, although food policy councils are extremely important as a means to encourage the exercise of direct participatory democracy, it has to connect itself to representative democracy and not oppose the two ways of influencing the future of the food systems in a way that respects the democratic requirement. Thirdly, the third dichotomy I would like to challenge is between the non-profit logic of many citizens-led social innovations in food systems, such as shared co-managed vegetable gardens, such as the incredible edibles that have developed in some parts of England, France, and Germany, the Lebensmittelretter, the people's fridges, where people who have too much surplus food put food available in fridges that others may benefit from, and so on. These are extremely important citizens-led innovations that, for the most part, rely on voluntary labor by people working in the evenings and the weekends to make them happen, to make them succeed, and to make them last. On the other hand, we have the economic logic that is dominating most parts of the food system, in which small entrepreneurs or larger actors in the food system try to make an economic profit from their activity in the food system. And the coexistence between these two logics, the non-profit voluntary citizens logic on the one hand and the economic logic of economic actors on the other hand, is sometimes one that is difficult to understand. My position is that rather than pitting the interests of the ones against the others, we have to combine them with one another. For example, we have to imagine ways in which the desire for cheap food of low-income families, low-income households, can be combined with the legitimate claim of food producers that they have a right to a fair remuneration for their work and for their produce. We have to redefine relationships in food supply chains to make them more fair, to make them more equitable, to ensure that they are sustainable also from the economic point of view, which means a decent remuneration for food producers whilst not ignoring the important claims of end consumers. So that is combining a non-profit logic with an economic logic. The economic logic is that the producers must be decently paid. The non-profit logic is that some households simply cannot cope with high prices and must be supported in other ways so that they too have a guaranteed right to good food. We also have to avoid a situation in which those doing voluntary work in citizen-led initiatives, spending time in their free time to make things happen, see the economic actors as opponents rather than as partners. In fact, many citizens-led innovations can only be viable in the long term if they also become more professional in the way they are run and in the way the bottom line expectations of the actors of the food systems are met. And I know of many cases in which citizens-led initiatives combined with the work of small food producers, small retailers that are part of the local economy in order to make these initiatives economically viable in the long term. So the end goal, I would suggest, of food policy councils is to make an exercise in political imagination, design ways, invent ways really in which the public logic of public authorities is combined with the civic logic of citizens-led social innovations, and in which the two logics, the public and the civic logic, are combined with the economic logic of the actors of the food system that must enter into schemes that are economically viable. So it is this exercise in political imagination that food policy councils can perform by building on the combined knowledge of all the actors of the local food system to build alternatives that can deliver on the different levels of what it means to be a sustainable food system. Of course, the environmental level, we need food systems that are ecologically viable, that respect the health of the soil, that reduce greenhouse gas emissions, that reduce the amount of waste and packaging in order to reduce the ecological footprint of food systems. But other dimensions of sustainability must be taken into account also. The social dimension, the need to support low-income families in particular, and the economic dimension, the need to provide decent wages for farm workers, fair remuneration for food producers, and to ensure that the viability of various alternative initiatives is ensured in the long term. So it's this task, it is these tasks really that food policy councils should perform in the future. I'm extremely grateful to Anna Wiesmann and to the other organizers of this meeting in Frankfurt to help us to think of food policy councils as a way to practice this exercise in political imagination. I wish you a very fruitful discussion in Frankfurt. I welcome very much the very encouraging dynamics that is now established in Germany around food policy councils. I shall be myself in Freiburg on 6th of December later this year in order to celebrate the establishment of a food policy council there in July, and I look forward to working with you more closely in the future. Thank you very much.